Hi, welcome to another Run Wild with Us, Ask Us Anything. So you are here with me. I am Lisa Kastner. I'm the founder and executive editor of Running Wild Press. And I am here with Chris Major, and he is one of our amazing editors. And we are here with you every Wednesday between 4 and 5 p.m. Pacific time, 7 and 8 p.m. Eastern time. And you can ask us whatever you want. If you are tuning in and it is not the time I just said or the day I just said, that isn't a big deal. Just go ahead, toss your questions into our comments, because what we do is we always go back and we read up on any kind of questions or responses that you had to our little chat. If you are watching and it is Wednesday between 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. Pacific time and 5 p.m. Pacific time, or 7 p.m. Eastern time, 10 p.m. Eastern time. 10 p.m. Where did I come up with that? 8 p.m.
No, yeah. It's one of those days. One of those days.
Yeah, pretty much. Then same thing, right? Just go ahead and put your questions in the comment section. We love your questions. We love to talk, obviously, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't do this every week. So with that, Chris and I were actually just talking about the fact that we have this great new press or imprint called Rise, which is to publish genre stories written by people of color and other underrepresented groups. And we want your stories, people. We have this amazing production manager. Her name is Alexis August, and Alexis has been querying all over the planet to find folks to send us their work. So if you fit into that category and you write genre, please send us your work. We absolutely want to publish you. Chris actually just finished working on one book that, I mean, I can't wait for you guys to read it. It's amazing. You're going to be like floored, right? It's that kind of fab.
It's good. It's good.
So please send us everything you got. So there you go.
There we go.
All right. So we were actually also just talking about our vaccine. So Chris, you just got your second one, huh?
I just got my second one. I'm so excited. Yeah, it's good. My arm's sore, but I had to realize like I have a low like threshold for pain. So my skin is super sensitive. So like what may like be sore to me may not be sore to a lot of other people. But it was nice. Again, I walked in at my scheduled time. I don't know, and because there are a lot of people at the hospital, I don't know how it works other places. But my thing is, if you're going to a place where a bunch of folks are doing it at the same time, I would, if you can have a scheduled time, I'd walk in, because I walked in my schedule. I walked in a few minutes before, and I think they had to like get another delivery of the vaccine, so I had to wait like 15 minutes. But outside of that, I went, I got my second dose, and then I sat, of course, the next 15 minutes, and then I left and went home. And it was simple and easy. But the card, they told me to keep it for life, so I got to figure out a place to put it to where I can remember where it is and not lose it and stuff. I thought about putting it in my wallet, but I feel like, I don't know, my wallet can be lost or stolen or something, so I have to figure out somewhere to put it.
Which one did you get? Which vaccine?
I got the Pfizer.
Me too.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Now when I first got it, I was all bold. I'm like, I won't have any side effects. And my arm was a little sore, like, I don't know, a couple hours later. And then, you know how you can tell you're getting sick? That feeling? Like you're not sick yet?
Yeah, it's coming on you. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So I felt that like later in the night. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go to bed. And I woke up in the middle of the night. Oh my God, Chris, my whole body hurt. Like to move, like even go like this. It was like, ah!
Right.
So I was like, okay, so this is not going to be fun.
Well, it's like, the thing about vaccines is like they're giving you kind of like a lesser strand of the virus. That's part of it. Like, it's a lesser strand. So there may be symptoms like they're kind of like, I was sore. Now my soreness didn't last after I went to bed and woke up. And my soreness was very mild, but it's a strand of the disease. So kind of, that's not unusual that you may have like some symptoms like you had it. but they do pass, and like you build up your body builds up the antibodies and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's not unusual. I hate that you had to, I hate that it was that inconvenient, but
Mm-hmm.
well, I mean, you first dose, I can tell you that I didn't get any second. On my second dose, I nothing outside of my arm being sore from the shot. There was nothing for me, but
Really? When did you get it again?
today, actually, I thought it was supposed to be this Friday. I got it today.
Oh, I don't know, honey. You got at
I
least
know. Don't
24
do that.
hours.
Don't do that. Oh, don't.
Because I didn't feel anything. Like, I had no pain. I was like, woo! Like, right
Right.
after. And then it was the next day, basically, when it went.
Right.
But I'm not wishing it on you. I'm just saying, like, that was
I
it.
know. But I mean, but again, we know what vaccines are to viruses. That's just what it is. You get a lesser strand um of the virus, and it does have effects, but your body builds up the antibodies and all that stuff. So it's necessary, but
Yeah.
I'm hoping that doesn't happen to me. I don't know. We'll see tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll tell
Tomorrow we'll tell.
for
That's
sure.
true. I'll check on you. I'll send you a note just to see how you're feeling. I'm
Good
hoping
stuff.
that you're like, Superman and you're fine. So.
Me too. I am too. Because when I'm not feeling good, I'm a wimp. Like I get a cold, and I'm bad about being like sick and not feeling good. I'm not gonna say I milk it, but I don't know. I'm dramatic about it when I'm not feeling well. I don't know.
Aww.
So we'll see. Hopefully I'm all right, and I don't have. If I have any discomfort, hopefully it's not too much discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. It's never. It's a vaccine. I didn't get COVID. I got the vaccine for it. So
Got it.
yeah,
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, like I said, I'll check on you tomorrow. We'll see what goes down.
sounds good.
All right. What was I gonna tell you? I don't even. Oh, you need to pick up. I'm telling everybody this. So, Alexis, our production manager, or one of them, she had recommended it's actually narrative poems, and it's called Citizen by Claudia Rankin.
Okay.
It is awesome. So it's actually all about microaggressions.
Oh,
And
really?
what's great about it is, so I kind of feel like actually everybody should read this, because if you don't understand what a microaggression is, and you don't understand why it's significant, like why it matters that it happens, how it affects people,
Right.
this will totally educate you on that. Like,
yeah,
it's really fantastic. So,
and I like to talk about microaggressions. Like, what's so funny is that me being like a black man, you pick up on them relatively early, so it's like second nature when you see them. It's hard to explain sometimes. I'm glad. Like in the book, she was able to kind of lay them out. But yeah, that's interesting. I'll check it out, Citizen. But yeah, with those, it's just small stuff that's my own personal definition of microaggression is something done to like protect oneself from like my blackness or the perceived blackness and stuff.
yeah.
I mean, it could be as simple as one that's not so subtle is like, let's say you're walking, I don't know, stuff as simple as like, women like double checking their purse when you walk into a room or something, or it's hard. It's hard because you see them and they're so normalized to me.
Well, and I think I agree with you. I think a microaggression is when someone's trying to protect themselves from someone who's different from them.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And what's so funny about the microaggression is that puts me as a minority on defense.
That's right.
When you see it, because it's like, well, holy crap, this person looks at me as a threat, which me being perceived as a threat could very well cost me my life as a black man. Right. So then that puts you on defense, and then like everything about the whole situation changes, and you can't completely let your guard down and just kind of be in the moment. You have to always understand, well, I'm a minority, and I'm in this room, and or in this place, and I have to think in survival mode as opposed to just being yourself.
Well, and for me, what was great about it was it's like, because where I grew up in, you know, my friends were all minorities or like people of color. I'd
Right.
say the majority were, and so I noticed a lot of this. But like I said before, like I don't know what it's like because I'm not a person of color. So
Right.
what was great about reading this, not that we never talked about it before, you know what I mean, like, but meaning like the friends I grew up with, like when we were little, it's not like we never talked about it, but it's interesting to read it or to like I'm listening to the audiobook so that I get a better understanding of like so that it gives you that additional like holy crap, like that's what it's like. So like to your point about being put on defense, one of the poems is about someone who gets a call from their neighbor, and they're on the phone with a friend of theirs, right? And they click over and they get a call from the neighbor. And neighbor's like, "There's somebody who's stalking your house." And like I've called the police, and they were like, "Someone's stalking my house." Well, hold on, and they click over to their friend, and they're like, "Hey, be careful," because their friend was going to meet up with them, right?
Right.
And the friend's like, "Someone's stalking the house. I'm right out front of your house. There's no one here." And
Hmm.
then the police come, and the person gets to their house, and the person they thought was a threat was the person's friend, like what I
Wow.
mean.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the neighbor is basically the person whose friend it was. He feels like they have to keep apologizing, like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry," and then something clicks, and when the neighbor says, "You may not want to take phone calls while hanging out on the street, like you may want to take calls like that in your backyard
Right.
or in the back," it it caused the narrator to say, "You know what, they can take calls wherever they want."
Right.
So it like flipped the from the like, I'm sorry, feeling like you have to apologize for something that there's no reason to apologize for, taking a phone call on the street, you know what I mean?
Right. Right.
So it's stuff like that where it the way that she wrote it enables you as the reader, if you've never experienced it before, to say, "Oh wow, I get that." Although I don't know how anybody wouldn't get that.
Right. Right. Right.
you
Especially
know
at something small like that, being able to take calls anywhere.
exactly.
And plus too, like when you notice these things, and you do notice that people try to like do the whole apology thing. The best apology is change behavior.
Yep.
So, um, it's kind of like when like, and I'll just use this in my experience as a black man. When you kind of make something evident to a person,
Mm-hmm.
an apology is nice, but there's no need every time you see this person to apologize. I get the shame that comes with it, and that's what comes from the urge. Like that's what makes the urge to want to keep doing that.
Mm-hmm.
It's because like there's a bit of shame, like, oh crap, I did that. But the best apology is change behavior. I can guarantee you, because it happens so much, like in
Yeah.
people of color's lives, that after the initial apology, we're kind of not like that's out of our head. At that point, if it happens, at that point, it's more like actions. Like if it happens again, but if somebody were to say something to me, and uh, the police for me as a black man is a bit extreme, because that is literally life and death. I think we just saw that with this trial.
Exactly.
Um, but and police are necessary. People say defund the police. I don't believe in that. We
Mm-hmm.
do need them.
Mm-hmm.
But it as a black man, it gets kind of more nuanced than kind of you get to. It's extremely nuanced. There's a lot of like red tape with that. But typically, when people kind of make offense to someone and they feel this need to apologize a bunch, I get the shame in it, but I can guarantee whoever worries about that people of color go about there every day, because it happens every day, even with not that person. It happens every day, a
Mm-hmm.
million times every day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's like, no, we're not harping on it. It doesn't necessarily ruin our day. It may ruin a few minutes or a couple hours, but that's and to be honest with you, I think the older you get as a person of color, it doesn't even we aren't it becomes more like, yeah, I should have known, or yeah, this is just a regular Tuesday, and it's not, I mean that's the experience.
Yeah, no, I know, but I feel like Like, I agree. We shouldn't defund the police, but I think they all need to be retrained.
Well, and here's the thing though, because I thought that too, until the guy in Chicago was killed. The lady thought it was a taser. She was training someone, and so then it's like she was a train, and then it's like, well, crap. What do we do now? It's perplexing because like I have an uncle who, what is it now? 30 years on the police force. He's a captain in the sheriff's department, and we talk a lot. And you hear what'd you say?
What does he think? Sorry.
Well, first and foremost, he's a black man, so there's that talk we still have, him being a police officer, me being a black man.
Totally.
And a lot of times, I mean, his whole thing was, it's hard. Like I said, it's nuanced, and these are talks that you compounded that you have from the moment you're a small kid, until you become an adult. But I mean, his thing, the police are the police. They're necessary. The law, we have the law. The law is necessary. I agree. But as far as training the police, he does think we need retraining. But the problem is, where do you start? We just had someone who trains police, and she killed someone, and she thought it was her taser. So where do you start? What route do you kind of uplift and then plant something else? And before this happens with that guy, I would have been 100%, overhauling the retraining and all that stuff like that. But this is a woman who'd been on the force for 20 some odd years.
Right.
She had been trained and had been training other people for 20 some odd years. Let's say she worked for 10, 15, and then she started training people. How many people would she have trained in those 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years? And she herself was kind of not, I guess, an ideal trainee, I would call her, because she didn't even know. So what did she teach? How many police officers did she teach? Kind of her thought process in training. So I mean, it gets tricky.
Well, but part of it to me is, I agree. First of all, what happened in her life that created that bias,
right,
that caused her to view that young man in such a negative light,
right,
that she would even think it would be appropriate to pull out a taser. Because I watched the interview with his parents, and what they described, I don't understand why the officer thought it was appropriate to pull out any kind of weapon. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I get her fear. Like, if I'm not mistaken, he had like warrants for missing a court date on a gun that he didn't have registration for. So I get, you run on your computer and you see that, and you got to think, well, he didn't show up to court, and this was for, like, there's a human element to it. The guy, but
agreed.
But definitely, I get why she'd want to pull out her taser, because I mean, even I put myself, like, I'm not a cop, but I put myself in that situation, and I'm going to be on defense. The guy, you caught a charge for having an unregistered firearm, and then you have a warrant for missing court. That's the thing. I'm going to be on the defense myself if I get out of that car. But the thing is, like, to not know the difference between a loaded gun and a taser, that's the thing for me. And especially if you've been a veteran for as long as you've been, it's never excusable for anybody, first year or 20 some odd year. But I get the defense or kind of the apprehension, because cops are people. There's no such thing as a blue life, by the way. I want to say that, because you can take that uniform off. But cops are people, and there is, and the people they talk to, they're people. So I get why there may have been apprehension, because somebody, and this is my understanding, I could be wrong about this. I heard this, so I could be wrong. I hadn't researched. I probably shouldn't even speak on it, but I did hear that he had a warrant for missing a court date for an unregistered firearm. So, like, again, I step out of the car, I'm going to be on defense. But then you're trained cop, and you're training other people, and you got to know the difference. You just got to. You got to know.
I mean, well, I agreed, but I also think the reason I asked the question is because it's like I think that we need to be aware of our biases that we're coming into something. You know
Right.
what I mean? That would cause like cause you to have that more extreme reaction.
Right.
And whether you're a police officer or not. And I mean, part of the reason I say this is because what made me think like, okay, so when am I behaving? When do I personally behave differently to people I don't know on the street, right? Because
Right. Right.
like I go for a walk every morning, and I say hi to everybody basically. And for me, my bias is if there are some homeless people that if they don't look mentally together,
Mm-hmm.
then I won't engage them
Right.
because so I'm now going to give everybody on the planet too much information. So my mother was a paranoid schizophrenic. And so I knew growing up because, you know, she'd been institutionalized several times and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And it was a very
Right.
interesting way to grow up.
Right. I
But
imagine.
if she was having an episode, right, the last thing you want to do is engage someone who's in the middle of an episode.
Right.
So for me, it's if I see somebody that they don't look like they're here mentally, right?
Right.
I won't engage. Beyond that, not I mean, the
I mean,
only other one would be cuz like where I grew up, if admittedly, like if someone was hanging out on a street corner, um like if I see them hanging on a street corner a lot, that usually where I grew up, and this was a long time ago, typically meant that they were in a drug dealer of some sort,
right.
right?
Right. Right.
So I won't engage that person just
But
because I
it
don't
goes.
care.
It go right. 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 But it goes back to conditioning, right? You've
Right.
been conditioned to know that, and a lot of. I mean, not to compare humans to dogs, but like it's you have to socialize a dog.
That's right.
And it's the same thing with people. So if you're not socialized to, at the end of the day, no matter what race, religion, creed, we're all far more similar than we think.
That's right.
And it goes to like being conditioned to recognize that I may see something that intrinsically or because of the media or what I was told by parents, friends, grandparents that um, people it's conditioning. If you haven't spent a lot of time around, when you see something that doesn't look or sound or talk like you, and even when you said like with one of the homeless people who is not well, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've been conditioned to one, pick up on the sign that they aren't well, and
Right.
two, know that I shouldn't engage with this person. But you know that because you've been conditioned, like
Mm-hmm.
you said, because of your mother. Like you have that experience. Like, oh, this is someone else may not have that experience, so they may engage with that person, but they don't know because I haven't been conditioned to dealing with people who may be um, dealing with people who may be in an episode or unwell at the moment. So
Mm-hmm.
it's conditioning, and that's the big thing. That's what's so crazy because as a minority, I think even for myself, if I'm invited to something or go somewhere, one of the things I have to think about as a black man is, you know, even sitting around laughing, talking,
Mm-hmm.
how many people of color or black people have these people been around? How many black people have these people interacted with? Because there are going to be biases, or there may not necessarily be the same biases, but
That's
I
right.
and it was so funny when I talked about double consciousness last week. These are all things I have to think about while also engaging with these people in casual conversations, not about race.
Yeah.
We can talk about sports or anything like that, but I have to think in my head, you know, how you know how conditioned is this person to people of color?
Mm-hmm.
Um, because and I can't explain because the biases that I can explain how people get. I mean, I don't know what you've been taught, media, I guess, but I can't explain those biases. But maybe that's because I'm a minority and I've never had to worry about. I've never. We all have biases, but as far as like when it comes to race, I think people of color don't really have the luxury of kind of having this bias
Right.
because a lot of that is being it's defense mode all the time. So we don't have the luxury of. I mean, I guess that doesn't make sense, but um,
I think it goes back to what you were saying before. It's about conditioning, right? We're all
Yeah.
conditioned in terms of, a belief system. So like with that woman, the only reason I wonder, like, okay, so what happened in her life that caused her to have some belief system, right, to respond, that to me that was extreme.
Right.
Because I think, like, if the police, if all of us were made aware of our biases, like of what that conditioning is and how it uh in some ways, right, like in my case it might help me in terms of not engaging with someone who's mentally ill, who may be dangerous, right?
Right. Right. Right.
um but in like the cases that we're talking about as well, if someone is engaging with someone that they view as dangerous for whatever reason, whether it be skin tone, whether it be, the way they're dressed, whatever, right? um if they're not aware that that bias is there, and therefore they're responding in a way that may be extreme, then they will respond extremely. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so I kind of feel like our whole nation needs to have this, training.
And
um
I think a lot of people just need to ask why. I always say the question why is like
yeah,
the shovel that you get to the truth. So it's like you
yeah.
see somebody and you feel a certain bias, start by
Mm-hmm.
saying, why do I feel this way? And then be honest with yourself and then
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, I feel this way because of this. And then why again until you get down to the very kind of core of the thing. And I think down there at that core of the thing is where you find how to kind of eliminate an ignorance or a certain bias. But you
No,
have to ask why, and you have to be honest with yourself. And all those, every level that you get deeper down, you have to be honest. Because let's say someone does have a bias and they ask why, and they say because this is XYZ,
mm-hmm.
and then there's another level to that. You have to um because it's your own bias, it's your own thought process, and we are responsible for our thought process. Is actually why I think a lot of people are afraid to address that, because we're responsible for that as adults. It's not
Right.
like we get to a certain place where it's like I can't go. We go off our own experiences. It's like I can't go off of what my grandparents told me, my mom told me, my cousin told me, my friends told me. Now I have to, and it's like a lot of people may have bias, but they may never have had I'm not gonna say a negative experience, but may not have had an experience so tragically negative that they need to have this bias. And I think if you really ask yourself, when's the last time, is there a reason for this bias? Is there a logical reason for this bias? Somebody with tattoos walking down the street. If you've been mugged by somebody with tattoos walking down the street, then it makes sense that the next time you see somebody with tattoos, you would connect that and say,
Right.
it's like that's what you would do, even if we get it. That's not the best thing to do, but that's what humans do,
Mm-hmm.
to try and avoid that threat again. So I think a lot of people who, if they may have bias,
Mm-hmm.
you have to ask yourself, why do I have it? And if you don't have a previous experience that would kind of connect some trauma to it, then you have to really be honest with yourself and say this is unfounded. Like there's no reason for this, um, and that's hard for a lot of people.
No,
Um,
I think that's 100% right. And that's because a lot of times too, it's being that self-aware, right?
right,
I think most people are not that self-aware, that when they are in the midst of something, some kind of engagement, and they have that kind of response that is bias based, that they can say, wait a minute, why do I think that way? I mean,
right,
like, I remember when I was in high school, we had this thing called intensive learning, and it was like 6 weeks, and each grade it was a different kind of intensive learning. And we had one that it was like a series of things, and one of them, I don't even remember how this came up, but it was actually teaching us about our biases. And
right,
someone made a comment about Native Americans, and I said, and I said this, it was something, I said something like, well, I thought they wanted to be uh all living in Nevada or something stupid,
right,
right?
right.
And one of the instructors looked at me horrified, right? Like, how
Hmm.
dare you? And I didn't know, right? I had no idea at that
Right.
point. And he was like, no, like, we basically stole the land like this land belongs originally to Native Americans, hence the terminology Native American, because they're, we made that up.
Indigenous.
Right, exactly. Indigenous Americans, really. And I had to go back and I did a bunch of reading, and I realized it was because like I had read a bunch of fiction when I was younger that inferred that this was like a choice. Do you know what
Right.
I mean? Like,
Right.
and that yeah, and so I had to self-educate to understand that what I said at that time, I mean, now obviously I didn't hurt anybody, right? But still,
Right.
it was wrong of me to have that assumption, to have that belief system, and I needed somebody to confront me in it, and to stop me from having it, and force me to educate,
Right.
I mean, and that's not easy. That's,
It's not for a lot of people because, again, I think most people are extremely sensitive, and I mean, I'm a sensitive person too, about certain things, and I think especially when there's some, again, like going back to our last talk, it's like typically when somebody talks to a minority about race,
mm-hmm.
they want to just hear how they aren't racist as opposed to trying to figure out kind of the experience of a minority. So
Mm-hmm.
even with that, like I'm kind of halfway torn in calling it a burden or a responsibility for minorities,
Mm-hmm.
because there's these biases that we're having to educate people on who created those biases, like not us. And so,
Mm-hmm.
um, but there is a responsibility you have to have. If I really, first you have to identify, if I really don't want to be biased in this area, I have to examine and first come to the conclusion if I really am. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest with you. I think if you're asking yourself if you're biased, you are. This is what it is. I think if you have to ask yourself, is that me? It probably is, and that's okay because that's the first. That's the first step in acknowledging, and then you have to go into why and start unraveling kind of the different layers of that. So, but yeah, but I think my biggest point is that, like, with the bias, some people, right, they aren't privy to the experiences of people, other folks, and there's these assumptions that you have, and if you haven't engaged or encountered someone who can enlighten you on that,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be ignorant. That's just what you're going to be. You haven't been
Absolutely.
conditioned. That's going to happen.
Absolutely.
um but once kind of given correction in that area, I think at that point, that's when the responsibility comes. Because we could read about race till we're blue in the face, right? But unless you talk to someone who actually lives it, um, it's a bit different. It's a bit, I don't want to call it nuance, but you just have to know somebody's experience. But like you said, with the Native Americans, and you said you thought, because that's how it's been portrayed. That's what you saw. You read it, maybe watched it on TV or something, and you figure, oh, this is what they wanted, until somebody enlightened you, and
Right.
then you took the responsibility to say, well, let me go look at this and dig into this, and then you became more enlightened, and that's how it works. But it takes that initial kind of pain point of realizing, crap, I do this. This is me. And people think
Exactly.
it's like a condemnation when they do that. It's not. It's progress. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
condemnation. You're not a bad person once you realize that you are biased.
That's right.
As a matter of fact, if you ask yourself and are able to identify that you are biased and what your biases are, that's step number one. You can't be more open-minded or anything like that until you've been able to say, I do. You can't solve a problem until you identify the problem.
Well,
And I
now,
guess that's
and like, let's go back to what you just kind of inferred, right? You, if you are open-minded, then you are going to be willing to do that work, right?
right.
That if you are open-minded, then when someone comes to you and says, "Hey, what you just said or what you just did caused this person harm," or opened a door for this problem, or was perceived in this way, and it's okay to be defensive initially. Everybody, when you don't
Yeah.
understand something, but it's getting beyond that initial defensiveness and saying, okay, what really transpired? What did I do that I didn't understand at the time?
Right.
Because I mean, there's so much terminology, there's so much slang we have in our culture that is race based, and like and has a negative connotation toward another ethnicity or another like an other group, that
Right.
a lot of times it, like, the terminology's been around so long we don't even realize it anymore, right? Until
Right.
somebody comes forward and says, please don't use that, please don't say that, because this is what that connotation means. It goes back to,
Right.
this,
Right.
um it's funny. So my husband's African American, and when we first got together, we would have conversations around, like, so back to your point about, like, you as a person of color, you always have to kind of be, especially if it's somebody you don't know, right? You kind of have to be aware, like, is this person engaging with me,
Right.
and my question to him was, when do you get to feel like you can be yourself?
Right.
Like, it becomes when white people are called, like, you're privileged, understand that's part of it, right? It's a privilege to be able to simply be yourself without
All the
worrying
time.
all the
Because
time.
I'll answer that question you asked your husband.
Yep.
Never. You don't ever feel like you can be yourself. At least not. You don't. It doesn't happen. And that's the Black experience. Is that
Yeah.
you can't. I mean, in the confines of your home. And I've dated a white woman before, but even still, like, throughout that, and she very much wanted to be educated on everything and was very open to learning, very open to kind of doing away with some of her biases, which naturally, it's one of the reasons why we dated. But there's, even when I was with her, there was always, I have to keep in mind the dynamics. Like, for example, we were driving, she was driving,
Mm-hmm.
and we got pulled over. She was speeding or something, just something small. And the police came to my side of the door to talk to us, and they didn't go to her side. And these are like things that, as a Black person, you always have to keep in mind. Like, this could happen. And so you may have someone who is white and who may, oh, this is nothing. This is, it's, to us, it's not. And that's an example with the police. But to answer, go back to your question, there is never a clear cut 100%. I get to be myself, my complete self. There's always, like, I have to, because my mere Blackness is a perceived threat. So anything, any kind of other humanity would be perceived, could be like, the perception of it could be exacerbated and taken to a place in which, as opposed to, people get sad, they get angry, they get happy, all these things. But when you're a minority, or when you're Black, I'll just speak from my experience. When you're Black, these things get brought to kind of a bigger, they're put up, I'm not gonna say a pedestal, but they're blasted. So there really is never I get to be my complete self, because here in this country, when you're Black, it's about self-preservation, and it's about, you got to make sure that you make it home every day, every night. So there's never, at least from my experience, there's never a full, I get to be myself, just kind of let my hair down. And you got to be on defense, because if you're not, you could, when I was with my ex-girlfriend, we got pulled over. They asked for my ID, and I reached for my pocket, and I started shaking. I gave it to them, and they let us go and all this stuff, no ticket. But, I got home with her, and I had an anxiety attack because I forgot. I didn't even ask if I could reach for my wallet. And
Yeah.
that that was the most traumatizing part about it, because me, she's a white woman, I'm a Black man. I'm not surprised they come into my side of the car. No, I'm not driving. But what I was surprised by, and what really gave me a lot of trauma from that experience, was they asked for my ID, and I got comfortable, and I just reached for it, and I didn't have that. Let me act, because when I'm by myself, I do that. Both hands on the wheel. I'm see your license or registration. My license is in my wallet. Can I reach for my wallet? Yes, you can. My insurance is either in my phone, it's in my pocket, or it's in my glove. Can I reach to my glove? Like, these are permissions you have to ask, that a lot of, I think, white people don't have to, because there's not this threat that I'll be killed because I'm seen as a threat for the mere fact of my melanin. So there's never, in this country, there's never I get to be myself. I mean, and this is look, I dated a white a woman before we lived together, and there was more comfortability, far more, kind of at home, but you're never like I get to be 100% completely me.
Yeah.
Um, it doesn't go away. I don't. It doesn't happen, and that yeah, it just doesn't happen.
It's funny. So my husband's a musician. He travels a lot. You know, he tours a lot. And for a long time, he lived in the UK for a while.
Oh, okay.
And he said it's the same in the UK. Like, because he's a black man, like they do lineups, you know. And so, like, he literally got pulled aside on the street and was like by a cop and was like, you
Yeah,
know, will you come be in this lineup, you know, for whatever, and we'll pay. They paid him like, I don't know, it was like 50 quid and a sandwich or something like that. And he
right,
thought, I could use a sandwich, yeah, sure, you
right.
know. um but you know, he was like, you know, there were tons of people on the street and he was the only one that they actually, you know, did that with. um but yeah, like I, you know, when you have that realization that you literally the minute you walk outside your door, right, you cannot be you,
Yeah,
right? I mean, that it just makes you realize, or may, you know, what a blessing it is to be able to do that, right?
yeah, yeah.
I mean,
And
it
even my
doesn't.
uncle, and even my uncle who's a cop, he told me he kind of we had a I'm taking the badge off moment. And I'm
Mhm.
your black uncle, and he's like, you got comfortable, and you can't do that because that could have turned out tragically because you got comfortable. And
Yeah.
so that's when, and I did, and it gave me a lot of anxiety for a long time. It was bad for a couple weeks. But yeah, I mean that's perfect. You walk out of your door and you can't. And even if there's like all this effort to kind of help the comfort or help bring on more comfort,
Hmm.
that's not something that black people or people of color can afford. Um, like that chance. That's just not something that because I mean you could lose your life at the drop of a hat.
Yep.
So yeah, yeah. As far as the lineup thing, yeah, I know. Yeah, the UK, they kind of it's a bit similar. I think their kind of racism is far more systemic than ours is, but um,
Mm.
I think yeah, just there's never the exhale moment because I mean, and if you think about it, never at home. I think one guy got shot. He was in the backyard of his mom's house, and the police came and shot him. Um, I
Wow.
wish I could remember his name, but like even that. So Botham Jean was eating ice cream on his couch in his living room, and somebody came into his apartment and shot him. Like that's the experience. Like that's what it is. I mean, I could be law abiding in my living room eating ice cream, and I could still be shot dead.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so walking out of your door, of course, it's the jungle every day.
Yeah.
It's the jungle. You got to survive it, make it home, and hope that. I mean, heck, even when you sleep, Breonna Taylor got killed. She was in bed. She was asleep. So it's like even when I lay my eyes down to go to sleep, like I could still be killed. So
Yeah.
yeah, but I'm rambling. But to go back to your point, you don't. There's no. You get to be yourself. There's always defense mode.
Yeah. And I just, I just think it's awful.
Yeah,
I
it
think
is.
all of it's awful. But
Yeah, but I'm glad we're talking about it and like people get to see it and kind of get kind of maybe I think maybe we're talking about some things that people may be afraid to talk to with their friends or their family members, and I think it's a good opportunity to do that. But yeah, yeah, I just think it's a good talk. But it is. But I mean, to be honest, I think Black Americans are so I'm not gonna say desensitized because but it's just every day. It's reality, right? So
hmm.
and I don't mean it's the wrong way. You, a white woman, you hear stuff like this, you're like, geez, I can't even. But it's like that's our reality. It may be hard for you to kind of think about and see, like me saying that I had an anxiety attack for days because I didn't ask the police if I could reach for my wallet when they'd asked for my ID. I told someone that, like, geez, I didn't know you had to do that, and it's like, yeah, that's what you have to do.
Yeah. I mean, like, so agreed, right? Like, I
Mhm.
won't. Well, I can't. Well, because where I grew up, there was literally. So I grew up in Camden, New Jersey, and you had to drive through Pennsauken and go over this little bridge, and that would take you into Camden. And
Right.
so a lot of times, if you were driving late at night, and if you if it well of any color, but especially if you were white, the assumption was if you were driving to Camden, that meant you were going to get drugs, basically, right?
Right.
So I got educated like your uncle educated you very early on by family friends who were like, if you ever get pulled over, just put your hands on the wheel and do not
Right.
move
Right.
them.
Right.
And everything you do, you ask.
Right. Okay.
Because
Okay.
yeah, no, yeah. I mean, I had that same education, but mind you, it's because of where I grew up and because of the assumptions based on anybody who would be found in that area.
In the area. Right. Right.
Right. Whereas like I have friends who grew up in like middle America or in the suburbs, you know, they had a much more positive view of police because, you know, they never had responses like that. Like I got pulled over. I went to a friend's house. I was helping her paint her room, right? Paint her house. And I, you know, finished up. It was like 2 a.m, right? And I'm driving home and I had my hair pulled back in a ponytail and I had no makeup on. I had like oversized sweats, right? This is like in the, I don't know, early 90s. And the police pull me over and the lead cop is like, all right, get out of the car. And like that kind of, and he's got his hand on his thing. And I looked at him and he said something like, okay, boy, get out of the car. And I was like, oh, fuck. And
right.
I was like, boy? And I literally said like, boy, because like I'm exhausted, right? I'm covered in paint, right? I'm all like nasty. And his partner starts laughing at him because he must have thought, I don't know what he thought. I mean, we can all guess what he thought, but whatever he thought. And then I was like, okay, can I, touch my door? And he was like, as soon as his partner started laughing at him, he was like, all right, just show me your, why are you heading over here? Like,
right.
And I'm like, I live here, like because he suddenly realized I was a female, right? Like I wasn't, but yeah, I mean, all these assumptions that come into the interaction is like, it's a lot,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that even in that, it's funny that his partner was the one who kind of like brought that to his attention, and he spoke so quickly and didn't even pick up on that, right? So that you were a woman, a female, but yeah, as far as and that, areas, look, wherever there's poverty, there's crime. So areas that may have low socioeconomic place, I mean, crime has no address, but
that's right.
I mean, I think the root core and problem that crime is I think the root of that is poverty. So like I get how coming into or out of a certain area may bring kind of certain assumptions, but at the same time it's important not to have those, because I've lived in places. I mean, I used to work as a leasing agent in property management, and I lived far more I made enough money, far more qualified across the board to live somewhere else, but I lived in what we call a distressed property, which was for low income people. And I lived there because the rent was cheap. And I'm a college educated Black man. I like to think myself as a relatively intelligent person, but I live there. So it's why, like, you can't just go into an area and say, oh, because people here are poor or have lower on the socioeconomic ladder, that they're necessarily up to something. But again, I have an uncle who's a police officer and I love him dearly. And these are decisions he has to make every day when he goes to work. So I do have a bit of sympathy with kind of how hard it may be sometimes to make these split-second decisions. But at the same time, it's like a pilot. Like, you can't have bad apples as police. You can't have bad pilot. Like, you can't have it was Chris Rock who said it. Police are like airplane pilots. Some you just can't, some professions you just can't have bad apples. Right. And I think it's similar. But yeah, like I said, I do talk from experience as a Black man. But again, I have an uncle and a cousin. One cousin, the cousin's in Georgia. He's on the sheriff's department. My uncle is a captain in the sheriff's department here in Birmingham. And I worry about it. No, he's got an office job now, but back when I was younger, yeah, I mean, I remember my mom and my grandmother worrying about him. I think and my grandmother used to get into it sometimes because some of the shifts he was taking, having to go out and deal with certain kinds of people and make these split-second decisions that could cost one person their life, multiple people their life, that could cost him his life. And so
Yep.
there's a sympathy with that. But at the same time, um, that only runs to a certain point.
Yep.
Because at that point, that particular officer, whoever they are, like you have to, the job requires thinking on feet. It requires um, instinctual, well, I won't say instinctual things, but somewhat instinctual things. That's just the nature of it. And I think people, I have friends who've taken jobs as police officers, people I went to high school with, like pension, and half the time, not half the time, but I know him, he does it in the suburbs. So he just drives around like waiting on people to speed or catch them without their belt buckle on. But there are other places that it does require thinking on feet and actually having to make these split-second decisions that could change people's lives, everybody involved.
And I don't envy anybody who elects to go into any form of, police or.
I don't either. Yeah.
I mean, there's no way in hell my hiney would have ever even. Nope. I mean, and mind you, for a very long time, I had a bias against police because of where I grew up.
Right.
Because I had never had a positive interaction. Every interaction I had, I'd say up until my late 20s, was negative. And I actually had to retrain myself. Yeah. And I mean, we had family friends who were in, different forms of, police force, but I never saw them on duty, I guess you could say. It was always, in more familial exchanges, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like Thanksgiving or Christmas or, whatever. But, and I had to okay, so back to your exercise of why, right?
Right.
I had to go back and if I responded negatively to someone who was an officer of any sort, right? A police officer, someone from the FBI, CIA, any kind of, official, if my response was negative, I had to dig in and ask myself why. Why am I responding in this way? What assumptions am I bringing to this exchange that are causing me to have such an, I mean extreme negative. I don't want to be in the same room with you. I don't want to talk to you. And a lot of it was based in fear because every exchange I had with a police officer involved me getting pulled over, a friend getting pulled over, somebody getting arrested. And a lot of times it wasn't, it wasn't warranted. It was an extreme interaction. And, because of that, I was like, I have no reason to trust anybody in the police force.
Yeah, I think the only reason I don't have that kind of extreme is because, again, my uncle, and actually, now think about it, his son-in-law just joined the sheriff's department. So only reason I don't have that super, because I would, only reason, because I've had enough experiences. But the only reason I don't have that is because my uncle, he kind of humanized that whole role, and I get to kind of be in his head and know kind of these split decisions you have to make and the things you see from people. Because police officers see the ugliest of people, the worst that, they have to see that, and then they see it split time, or real time. But I can say that the only reason I don't have an extreme idea of the police is because my family is in the police force, and we do have talks. One, again, a double consciousness. One, we have talks, me being a black man, and two, just kind of dealing with the police in general. So that's why I don't have that extreme, but I've had enough experiences to have that extreme. But I just, in talking to my family members, that's why I don't. But I mean, when you say that, I'm not surprised that you may have had an extreme, but for me, typically I try to, I think everybody does. I think we just kind of play a game. I think people put up a charade, but I think most people try not to deal with police as often as possible. I don't think anybody wants to deal with the police.
Well, it's interesting, back to your point about how you don't have that kind of bias.
Yeah.
That's what broke me of that bias was actively thinking about it, but also because I started having some friends who were on the force, and like, I mean, I met them at like a beef and beer, right?
Right, right,
So
right.
I didn't know at first that they were police officers, and we're sitting around hanging out and talking. And up until then, if I did have an interaction with somebody who was a police officer off duty, they were, that like it's like it's like a self defense, right? Like a shield, like an emotional shield.
Yeah.
So like they still behave as if they're on duty, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, these people actually didn't. They were more human, like what you're describing with your uncle, right? And
Right.
so when we talked, like they would tell me stuff like your uncle shares with you about, like, being an officer and what that really means, and why they joined the force and all that. And that's that kind of interaction. That's what really made me to start thinking about why am I responding so negatively? Like, these are good people. What is it in my background that's causing me to have this extreme response? Like, what's my why?
Well, here's the problem. The problem is you guys are hanging out, and they are more human hanging out than they are with a badge on. When I said my uncle was like took his badge off, it wasn't a cop having a conversation with me. It was an uncle having a conversation with a nephew. That's what I meant. But like, you're going out, getting beer and burgers with people, and they seem more human. We get you have a job, but if you're more human if you're a cop with a gun, a taser, a baton, handcuffs, bulletproof vest, all that stuff, and you're more human off the clock than you are on it, like we need you to be human on the clock. We'll show some humanity to people on while you're on duty. And I get it. Like I said, like I have people I'm attached with, their police officers. I get you kind of you got to be a cop. You got to be the person. You got to. There's the law, and when it's broken and you see it, it's your job to go and do that duty you signed up to do. But I don't think anybody is debating that. But I think if a person, like, you can be you off duty in the same way you can be you on duty in the same way you can be you off duty. You just deal with people differently. If you deal with, think about how many people police officers see every day. Like, you can size up. I would like to think this is wrong, but I would like to see police be able to have being able to size up people a little differently, because you would have to think at some point it gets repetitive dealing with the same people, depending on where you're patrolling and what you got to do. You would think that, but I think if somebody would consider themselves more human, or having a little bit more humanity off the, like, there's never a better time to be human than when you dealing with people in those kind of situations, because you can be a cop. And I think one guy was breaking up a fight between two women. He may have had warrants, but he was shot and killed. Granted, warrants, that's for an arrest, not a death sentence. But that's a moment in which being a human being comes into play. This guy's breaking up a fight, and I get, again, none of these decisions are easy, and that's why there's like when you sign up to do this job, it's a hard job, and you should know that coming into it. These split second decisions, these biases that we have as people off the clock, and we bring them on because we take us everywhere we go. But that's the responsibility you have. It's not just simply responsibility of writing a ticket or even having to like chase someone, like, you have to be a really good judge of a lot of things when you do that job. And a lot of people, I think, aren't. And I think there's a culture that is kind of so there that I think there's a culture that doesn't lend itself to emphasizing how important it, like, you see it on the cop cars all the time, honor, duty, all this stuff you see on the car, but there really is a duty. And I think that part kind of gets, sometimes, not all the time, of course, everybody knows all cops aren't bad. I happen to think most of them aren't, my personal opinion. But yeah, there's a duty. Yeah, there's a duty. And so, again, when you see people breaking the law while you're on the clock, you got to do something about it, because that's your job. I had my uncle, he's a captain. He told me one time, if he had officers come in and they didn't have it, if they're patrolling, and he's like, you got no tickets, you got nothing, you didn't see it, you were out at work, all day and you saw nothing, and that was one thing for him. And he was like, "You're not doing your job." So I totally get, like, you have to. You have to do what you have to do on the clock. But I think if you're more human, when you're not, you don't have the power of people's lives in your hand than you are when you have it. I think that's a problem. I think
But
that's when
I
the
mean, I
problem
think
is.
but the duty is to all of us. The duty is
Right,
not just to a subset, and I think that gets lost. You know what I mean?
right. And yeah, that's a good point. That's a good observation. The duty is to everyone. But,
Mm-hmm.
this is the United States of America, and there's such a deep. I like to read. I read a lot of Ta-Nehisi Coates. I've read almost every book he's written, and I mean,
Oh,
yeah,
I
I mean,
love him. Yeah.
yeah. I think that it's so. It, if you're a black person, you think about it, kind of you get a little feeling of hopelessness because it's like it's so rooted and deep and intertwined
Yeah.
that you're like, geez. I think he's on record as saying he doesn't think it'll ever be solved, which is, he's one of the leading voices on race. I don't think that. Kind of I think my generation. I'm a millennial, and I think my generation has been called the post-racial generation, which I don't think we're necessarily that. But I think we're getting to a place in which I think the country's getting to a place in which I can't say that. There's no reason. People just got killed. Like I can't. I don't know. I'm hopeful. I like to think of myself as a patriot, so I like to see us in our best light. But
I'm
yeah, I
hopeful
don't know.
too, but I think there's gonna have to be at least one. It's gonna take at least one or two more generations, and it's got to be active. Like we've got to
Yeah,
actively think. We need to actively talk about it, right? We need
yeah,
to. So everything you were saying of talking about, right? There
yeah.
needs to be an active like. And uh did what I just do, was that what was my intent, right? What's
Right,
my why? Where did
right.
that come from? And if
That's the
someone
thing.
comes to me and says, "Hey Lisa, yeah, that shit was nasty," right? I need to listen, and I need to be open to listen.
Yeah,
And when some, and I think that's going to take at least I'd say at least two more generations, because we still have older generations that are, they don't understand their deep rooted bias. They don't understand their deep rooted racism. And so they feel justified, right? And because they can't hear it when someone says, like, that's why I think Citizen, the by Claudia Rankin is so important, and books like that,
yeah,
because it provides visibility to those everyday things that may feel like normal, right? Or
right,
like to your point in the beginning of this, right? Like, yeah, that happens, but now, I mean, you're like desensitized to it. Like it hurts, but it's kind of like, well, it happens every day. So, but
right,
allowing or enabling other people to feel that who would never feel it,
right,
that's right. And really, I mean, there's got to be like a revolution of individuals who are saying, okay, I'm listening now. And not
right.
only am I listening, not only am I hearing, but I'm willing to change
I
based
think
on my new understanding.
my hope comes from this, that we already have a generation of young people, and by young people I mean teenagers and below, who have grown up, because like my grandma, my mom, like this stuff hasn't always been filmed. It hasn't been covered. I mean, our community has known about it, but the world hasn't. And I
Right.
think there's like a whole generation of people coming up who are able to see this. Um, and I think if I had any hope, it's that, okay, now we're getting to a place in which people actually get to see that this isn't some, it corroborates our experience. Like, we're not making this up. We're not crying wolf. We're
Yep.
not this angry black person. It's on film. You get to see all these things, our plight. Like, you get to see it for yourself. That's one thing I thought about even with the George Floyd thing. It felt like everybody from all communities came together wanting the same kind of outcome for this. And I think kind of like teenagers and younger, maybe even early, mid early 20s, even on down. I think there's I, if I had any hope, it's that they would have grown, because Trayvon Martin happened what 2010. So now we're going on what 11 years of that being filmed multiple times. We get to see it and we get to see the outcome. So the lack of empathy with the criminal justice system, all that stuff. So like I do have that hope but but again, with older generations, like my grandmother won't trust a white person for the rest of her life, but she's seen different stuff. And
right.
she's, nothing about her is, she can't fathom my approach to race because her survival didn't let her when she was coming up.
And that is
And
completely understandable.
and on the
I
flip
honestly think it's completely understandable.
and on the flip side, though, you have to think about people who perpetuate that kind of thing. Their life, like, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Like, and I hate to put it that way, but I think once people are I do reach a certain level of maturity and age in which you don't care about new ideas or anything like that. What's worked for you is worked for you, and that's where you're gonna go with. At least we see that a lot in the South. So that's why I say mid-20s on down to younger generations, I think. And even, I don't know, my mom's like, what's before millennials? Like, I don't know, Gen X or something, I think. They're, it gets better. So yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe a couple generations, this will be, be a lot less bleak, I should say.
Well, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
With that, I want to thank you, Chris, because this has been an awesome conversation. Anybody who is watching this, like I mentioned before, feel free, if you have any comments or questions, go ahead and pop it in the chat, because what we'll do is we'll come back next week and we will respond to your comments and questions. So everybody have a great night, and we will see you next week.
All right.
Ciao.